Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We're continuing on the value of T for truth. We're going to look at how to speak the truth in love in an upcoming episode. But first, here's something we should look at before we even decide whether or not to speak. Proverbs 19:11 says, "A man's wisdom gives him patience. It is to his glory to overlook an offense." 1 Peter 4:8 says, "Above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins." So before speaking truth in love, we should ask, is this something I should even be speaking about? What I have found over the years is many of the problems or things that offend me that I thought I had to go in and confront and address and get in there and battle, really, I just used Bible verses as an excuse to get in there and have a fight. and God always sees the motives. And so, when we misuse Bible verses to get our way and our agenda, it doesn't excuse us from a wrong decision. And so I have found, as I've gotten older and hopefully a little wiser and hopefully a little more patient, that I actually probably say less, I confront less, and when I do confront, I find it's more effective. And so I want to just share some thoughts that might help us discern, is this even something we really should speak up about? I like what Greek philosopher Publius said. He said, "I've often regretted my speech, but never my silence." Proverbs 10:19 tells us, "In a multitude of words, sin is not absent." And I have found that I can do my IQ a favor when I speak less, because I actually look smarter when I don't talk. And so what you see inside of Scripture is that when you aren't talking, you actually are perceived to be intelligent. So that's very encouraging for some of us. Now, here are 5 questions I try to ask myself to help me determine whether or not this is something I even need to go and address. Now, I would like to give myself an A+, but I honestly can't. So I might get a C on this. Now, number 1, is this just a misunderstanding? This often just has eliminated so many times I felt I needed to go address something, because what I do is I just go, is this a misunderstanding? I just stop and I take the person that maybe I feel like I need to confront. I look at the consistency. What's their pattern? What's their consistent behavior like? And all of a sudden, something that offended me that seems out of the norm, it's an anomaly. It allows me to really go, you know what? This is not their normal pattern. This is not a normal behavior. So you know what? Maybe they just had an off day. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding it. And often, because it's not a pattern, I just go, you know what? I don't think I need to address that. Now, if it continues, then that's a different scenario. Number 2, if this continues, will this hurt our relationship? The statement, don't make mountains out of molehills. A lot of times people are in there just fighting, little battles, little skirmishes that don't matter, and they end up making a world war out of it. And a lot of people have lost great relationships. They've lost influence because they're really just fighting something that really, at the end of the day, it just didn't need to be addressed. So I asked myself, is this, if I don't address it, will this ultimately hurt my relationship with them? And sometimes it really doesn't. But if I go, you know what, if I don't address this, it's going to hurt my relationship, then it changes my mentality, because I'm not fighting with this person, I'm fighting for this person. This matters enough to me that I'm going to push past what's awkward and what's uncomfortable because I value our relationship. And if I don't address this, I could lose this relationship. And so that's an important question. Number 3, is this a battle worth fighting at all? In other words, if I fight this, and let's say I even win it, did it actually change anything? There are many things that at the end of the day, you can get in there and fight. At the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily change anything. It didn't really change that person, didn't change our relationship. So there are times you just go, is this really worth a battle fighting? inside of war, in terms of just general strategy, there are so many battles you could fight, but it's not fighting every little battle that matters. It's picking the ones that, if you win, make the biggest difference to the overall war. And so there are times generals just go, I'm not going to put a bunch of resources into fighting this little skirmish. I'm going to put more resources into this full assault over here, because this is the ground that really matters. And number 4, is this even my battle? There are times that I'm offended, I'm all fired up, and I have to stop and step back and go, is this actually even my battle to go fight? Proverbs 26:17 says, he who passes by and meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a dog by the ears. Have you ever got involved in something and it came back to bite you? Well, there you go. It was probably you meddled into something that really wasn't your battle to fight. And so I have just found it's a losing battle when I jump into other people's battles. I take up an offense for somebody else. Look, I don't have a grace to deal with your offense. I'm not graced to do that. God gave you a grace to go deal with that, but it's not my grace to deal with your offense. Number 5, is this an opinion or is this a fact that I'm upset about? And again, we talked about this in the last episode, but it's worth repeating, because often the things that I might be offended about are really just my own personal preferences. It's just my own feelings, but it's not necessarily a fact. So just remember, your feelings #aren't facts. So step back and go, is this really a fact based inside of Scripture, or is this just a feeling or an opinion? All right, we're going to continue next week on the value of truth.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.